Chapter 3. The clanking of the door whipped Anne from her daydream, bringing her eyes to focus on the two doctors walking towards her and Thomas. She jumped to her feet. Thomas recognized the men as Dr. Grayon and Dr. Arbeck, the two physicians he had requested. Dr. Arbeck was from India and had a thick accent, so he allowed Dr. Grayon to do most of the talking. "How is he?" Anne blurted out. Dr. Grayon motioned for Anne to sit. Anne sat, and Thomas greeted the doctors by shaking their hands. Dr. Grayon asked, "Do you want the good news or the bad news first?" "Why do they always ask that at hospitals?" Anne questioned. "They don't always ask. Sometimes there's no good news, so you don't get a choice," Thomas replied. "We want the good news first." Dr. Grayon sat across from them with his feet planted firmly on the ground. "The good news is we have him stabilized, but sedated. He won't wake up, and we're going to keep him like that until we can get his pain under control." "That's good news?" Anne asked. "Yes, it's good news because he's alive, and he's feeling little, if any, pain right now." "Okay, what's the bad news?" Anne asked, terrified of the answer. Thomas reached for her hand, squeezing it hard. "Well, your son's ill, and by the look of all the tests we ran, he's been sick for a while. Has he said anything to either of you?" Dr. Grayon's eyes bounced from Thomas to Anne. "No, I thought he looked tired, but I thought it had to do with the stress of everything," Anne explained and looked to Thomas to comment. "I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, although Peter has always had a weaker immune system. Headaches and lethargy are something he continuously battles alongside his cerebral palsy. And of course, you know about his urinary issues. He's never been able to get those functioning normally," Thomas said. Dr. Grayon spoke. "Peter's body's flooded with infection. I found 4 organ infections in just the tests we ran, but I would think there are more." Anne interrupted. "4? Where?" She nervously played with her purse strap as she waited for the answer. "There's infection in his lungs, his heart, his liver, and his gallbladder. Like I said, there may be more. Basically, his whole body's under attack by bacteria right now. His temperature was right under 105 degrees when you brought him in." Dr. Grayon paused to make sure they were listening, and then continued. "I wish I could say that's the worst of it." "It's his kidneys, right?" Anne interrupted. Nodding, Dr. Grayson continued. "Yes, I'm afraid we have to mention kidney failure. His liver appears to have been working overtime to compensate for his weak kidneys, and he has taxed his liver as well." "What does all this mean?" "There's a lot going on. When one part of the body's not working, something must compensate. Then that part of the body starts to malfunction, and something else must compensate. It's like a house of cards." "Please just tell me what this means," Anne pleaded. "We're treating the infection intravenously with antibiotics. His immune system is too weak to fight it alone, but with the medicine, we should clear up all the infection. We're going to start dialysis on him, but..." He paused to make sure he held Anne's eye contact. He needs a transplant. Breathing heavily, as if a truck had landed in her lungs, Anne repeated, "A transplant." She looked to Thomas, who nodded in agreement with what the doctors were saying. "We knew it would probably come to this. When does he need it?" Thomas rubbed his hand on his chin. "Yesterday." Dr. Graham spoke frankly. "How do we get a kidney?" Anne looked at Thomas. "We have to find a donor." "I'll do it. Please take mine." "The first thing we need to do is get the blood type matched. Peter's type O negative. Do you know which of you is O?" "I'm A positive," Thomas said. "Then you should be the O. He has to get it from one of you." Dr. Graham looked at Anne. The color in her face drained. "I have to be type O to give a kidney?" "Yes. To be a kidney match, you need to make sure the blood type of the donor matches. That's the first step. With Peter, he has some special considerations, and we would like him to limit his kidney donor to immediate family only, most likely a parent. It would limit his risk of rejection. His body's too weak to risk a non-relative." "Okay, I'll do it," Anne said as her throat tightened. "Oh, please, Lord, don't let this come down to this. I can't lose him now." Dr. Graham nodded. "Good. We'll be moving Peter into his own room in intensive care as soon as dialysis is finished. It should be another couple of hours before we have him settled, and then if you would like to see him, that should be okay." "Yes, please. I want to see him as soon as possible," Anne said. "We'll make sure to notify you. In the meantime, we can send you to the lab and get started on your blood work. We really don't want to waste any time getting a donor lined up. It's all very premature to go into details, but if we're able to go forward with the procedure, we'll sit down with the full disclosure details." Both doctors stood up. "Thank you," Thomas said, and stood, offering a second handshake to the doctors before they left. "Thomas, I feel like I'm going to be ill," Anne said. "Is it really coming to this?" "I'm afraid so. Let's just do one day at a time." Thomas embraced Anne. He ran his fingers through the back of her golden hair, smelling her vanilla shampoo. "I need to call the kids and give them an update again. I'll tell them to wait until tomorrow to come visit, though." "Anne, it's tomorrow. It's after 6 a.m. The lab just reopened for the day." Anne's eyes popped wide open as she pulled away from Thomas and turned to look at the clock behind her. Being in the hospital had warped her sense of time. Moments later, Anne was at the lab waiting to get her blood drawn. Her stomach felt like ocean waves were bouncing off the bottom of it, flipping it inside out. "I really don't feel well, Thomas," Anne said as she fanned herself for air. "Did you eat anything today?" "No, I haven't eaten today. I didn't eat much yesterday either. I was saving my calories for a celebration after the concert. I even baked a cake." Saddened by the memory of what would have been a celebration, Anne looked down as she finished talking. "Why don't you go grab a juice and maybe a piece of toast before they draw your blood, or you'll get sick," Thomas said, but then stood up. "Oh, never mind. I'll do it. I can run through the employee line." It's a lot faster. Wait here. I'm going to hurl all over this floor. It's too bad. It looks like it was just waxed. If I throw up, it'll be worse than the last time I threw up in public. Trying to forget about the bigger issue, she allowed herself to daydream. The last time I got sick in public was over a decade ago when I was pregnant with Shiloh. It had been in the afternoon, right after Anne dropped Peter off for his half day of kindergarten, and she decided to get some groceries. Anne rounded the corner with a stuffed grocery cart. She stopped to grab a roll of paper towels and knocked a stack over with her baby belly, 8 months huge. Nauseated from the pregnancy, it was excruciating being in a grocery store. As she collected the towels and restacked them, her cell phone rang. The caller ID confirmed it was Peter's school. Kindergarten had been a rough transition for everyone in Peter's path. Peter was the second youngest in his class, as he had a July birthday, and he wasn't adjusting well. It had been a few months, but they were all still in the process of working out the knots, which occurred regularly. Anne now referred to the school as Peter's school, because whenever someone called, it was about Peter. "Hello," Anne answered. "Mrs. Arnold?" "Hi, Valerie, it's Anne." The school secretary, Valerie, and Anne were on a first-name basis after the fall they had experienced. "Yes, hi, Anne. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Krieg. She needs you to come in here to pick up Peter, and she wants to meet with you while you're here." "Is Peter all right?" "Yes, he's fine. I can't say for sure what's going on, but Peter has been in her office again since lunch." Mrs. Krieg was the principal, and she had the most patience with Peter. "Well, I just visited with her in a meeting last Wednesday. Can I talk to her?" Anne's head was spinning. "I'm not supposed to say over the phone. You just need to come down here." "Okay, I'll be right there then." Anne gulped as she hung up the phone. She looked at her cart. She had too many items to put back, and she estimated that it would take another 20 minutes to get everything checked out, as she saw only 2 checkout lines with cashiers, and each line was filled with people. Valerie didn't say it was an emergency, and I do think she would have said if it were an emergency. I'm just going to get checked out now because I don't know when else I can get groceries since going to the store with Peter's a train wreck, Anne reasoned. Anne was waiting patiently in line at the checkout when someone lined up behind her with a cart. "Oh no, I smell fried chicken." The lady behind her had a package of it from the deli. She took a shallow breath in trying not to inhale any chicken. She knew if she gagged, she would have to throw up. Looking ahead, she noticed there were still 2 people with packed carts in front of her, and the other checkout lane was closing, so she had nowhere else to go. "Don't think about it," she told herself. The back of her neck dampened. Anne lifted her hair up and held it with one hand in a makeshift ponytail as she fanned herself with the other hand, desperately trying to move the air. Cold sweat trickled down her lower back. "I need a distraction." She looked to the magazine rack. Trembling, her hand could barely flip through an issue of Good Housekeeping. It didn't work. "I gotta go," she blurted out to the lady who was standing behind her. Frantically fanning herself with one arm and trying to get the cart out of the aisle with the other, Anne bolted to the bathroom. Her stomach roared. She felt her cheeks and ears burn red. "I hope no one sees me." Her panic doubled when she saw a sign on the woman's bathroom door that said, "Out of order." Still fanning her face, Anne turned to go to the men's room and saw a cleaning cart stuck out of the doorway and a sign posted, "Please come back, being cleaned." Anne's deep breathing quickened, and she felt like she was hyperventilating. She needed air or a toilet. Panicked, she looked around, but there was nowhere else to go. "The cleaning person isn't even here." Yanking the cleaning cart out of the doorway with one arm, and now, covering her mouth with the other, she charged in. "Ma'am, the bathroom's closed, but," called the lady at the closed checkout lane as she started to follow Anne to the bathroom. Anne didn't care. She was running. The stalls were on the back wall, but the urinals were lined up on the wall closest to her. Choosing the closer of the two facilities, she barely made it to the urinal on the wall before she lost it and puked all over the white marble. Brown mush oozed down the wall and onto the tile. She wasn't able to bend over a toilet, so the vomit ran all down the front of her dress and even soaked her shoes. Chunks dripped from the tips of her blonde curls, which now stuck to the sides of her face. She felt defeated. "Ma'am," a voice called from the open doorway, and then trailed off as the cashier, whose voice it was, got sight of Anne covered in vomit. Anne looked back at the woman, knowing she was a hot mess. She felt there was nothing left to do but laugh. Once she started, she couldn't stop, and she was laughing hysterically. "I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be on my way to my son's school for a meeting. I got sick. I'll clean it up," Anne offered as she wiped her face with paper towels she'd pulled from the paper towel dispenser. The cashier smiled. "I saw you were going to be sick. I was trying to get you this." She held up a bag she had grabbed from her checkout. "I didn't think you were going to make it in here," she giggled. "Nope, you were right." Then they both laughed until they had tears in their eyes. It was a lovely bonding moment. After the laughter died, the cashier spoke. "I'm supposed to be on my break now, but why don't you come back to my till? I'll ring you up so you can get going. I'll have the stock boy come back and clean up this mess." "Oh no, I can do it." The lady held up a hand. "Honey, you need a break. Let me help you." "Thank you." Anne smiled. She did need a break. She could barely handle this interaction covered in humiliation. Moments later, Anne loaded her van with groceries and glanced at the clock. For Anne, motherhood was always a battle against time. 45 minutes had vanished since the school summoned her, and it would take her 15 minutes to get there if she didn't hit any traffic. She didn't have time to run home to change, but she couldn't go meet the principal covered in vomit. The stench alone was making her dry heave. Resourceful, Anne rummaged through the van for something else to slip on. 4 kids and 2 adults in a household means there has to be something abandoned in here. She discovered a gym bag full of sweaty men's clothes, but she quickly discarded it. That, too, nearly made her sick again with the odor of smelly feet. Oh, wait! There was a white dress shirt of her husband's. Thomas always kept a pressed shirt in all the vehicles in case he got called to work when he was out running errands. Today, his need for convenience would save her. Slipping it on over her dress, she was able to button it over her baby belly, and it was so long that it met the hem of her dress at her knees. She was able to gather the material enough to tie it up above her belly with the excess length. "I don't look too bad for a minivan makeover." Moving on, she looked at her feet. Her white flats had gotten the worst of the vomit, littered with chunks and a fumigating odor that would make a pig cry. Her oldest son, Paul, had a pair of tennis shoes in the van, and she could slip her feet into those, but they were too tight. Anne kept looking. My boots! Anne always kept a pair of snow boots in her van, because you just never know what a Minnesota winter will do. She ran to the back of the van and almost shouted in joy when she found them. They were gray with fur trim and little puff balls. It was nice out today, 65 degrees, and no snow. Maybe I can be in and out before anyone sees my feet. Okay, I'm set, she thought, and drove to the school. She made it into the front office in one piece, and she could see Mrs. Krieg had her door open. Immediately, she identified Peter's loud, boyish laughter. She walked closer to the open door to see Peter and Mrs. Krieg sitting on the floor, playing dinosaurs together. No wonder I can't keep him out of your office, Anne called into the doorway. Mom! Peter's whole face lit up when he saw her. He ran over and grabbed her leg for a comfort leg hug. Is it snowing? He asked as he saw her boots. No, honey, it's nice out. Peter frowned and gazed at her boots. Anne's stomach was tight. I don't know why Peter isn't in class, and I feel like a freaking clown standing here in my snow boots with my big pregnant belly. Do you need me? Anne self-consciously looked at Mrs. Krieg. Yes. Mrs. Krieg motioned for Anne to come take a seat. How are you feeling? Okay. Well, sort of. I mean, I feel pregnant, but I'm not sure why I'm here. Can you tell me what's wrong today? Anne rambled. Anne was normally a confident person, except when it came to Peter. He had her whole heart wrapped in his innocence. Peter, can you run this box downstairs to the janitor's room in the basement? Mrs. Krieg asked. The mail had arrived an hour ago. Normally, Valerie would sort the mail and leave it in the mailboxes, but Mrs. Krieg snatched the package from Valerie as a decoy to get some alone time with Anne. Mrs. Krieg had been an educator for over 4 decades, and she was always thinking ahead. You can get a prize out of Valerie's treasure chest when you get back, for being helpful, she added. Okay. Peter took the box and left. His dinosaur noises were still on his lips, and the 2 ladies could hear them dissipate as Peter got further away from them. Once they were quiet, Anne's heart sunk. She turned her attention to Mrs. Krieg, smiled, and waited. You may remember we have all school parent-teacher conferences in 2 weeks. I wanted to talk to you now about something so you'll have time to think about it before we all sit down together. Anne nodded. Mrs. Krieg continued in a low, even tone. We had another incident this morning, and these incidents are becoming such a regular thing. I think it's time to start thinking about getting Peter some support in the way of medication to help his moods and excessive energy. Medicine? Anne immediately got defensive. What happened? There was a serious incident in the lunchroom. Peter threw his plate and the plates of 2 kids sitting next to him at the wall. He was upset and difficult to calm down. So the lunchroom attendant sent him up here. I showed him my dinosaurs and we've been playing, but I didn't mention anything about the lunchroom yet to him. I was hoping we could talk about it together with you here." "There must have been a reason," Anne said, as she knew it didn't sound like something Peter would do unless he was triggered by something. "Anne," Mrs. Krieg interrupted her thoughts. "Peter will be back shortly, and I'm going to bring this up with him, but I also need to remind you to talk to Mr. Arnold about the treatment. I'll be bringing it up at conference time, and I hope to have a timetable for a treatment plan agreed to by then." "But why? He's a kid. Kids get upset." Leaning towards Anne without losing direct eye contact, Mrs. Krieg harshly whispered, "Anne, his teachers are requesting he get a behavior evaluation. They can't keep having these interruptions. We don't have the resources to spend so much time on one kid. Plus, it's not fair to him. The kids see him getting emotional, and he gets singled out as the weak kid. The district's really coming down hard on schools this year to have preventative bullying measures in place. These incidents place a giant target on his back." Anne chewed her lip. "I didn't know the teachers complained about him." Her heart was breaking, but it was interrupted by the sound of Peter, outside the door, digging through Valerie's prize box. "I know you want the best, and trust me, Anne, it's time to look at going a step in this direction and get him some medical support." Mrs. Krieg offered her last advice in a voice hardly above a whisper to shield Peter. Peter returned to the room and stood next to his mom. Mrs. Krieg nodded at Anne to start the conversation, which was a routine they all knew too well. "Honey, do you know why I'm here?" she asked as she reached out a hand to softly rub his back. "To take me home again." "Yes. Do you know why you have to leave school again before it's over?" "'Cause I hate tuna." He wrinkled his forehead in disgust as he said it. "Please don't use the word hate. You know, you don't hate anything. But yes, we know you don't like tuna, which is why I packed you a bag lunch today. What happened? Did you lose it?" "They took my bag lunch and made me put tuna on my plate," Peter defended. Mrs. Krieg interjected. "We have a new policy we started this last quarter, which clearly states you can't bring bag lunches from home. A hot lunch is healthier, and so, in compliance with the policy, the lunch ladies had to discard the bag lunch. They offered him a hot lunch as a substitute." "What? Are you kidding me? I never heard about this policy." "Peter has a serious food aversion to tuna, which is why I deliberately packed a lunch for him today. You took it from him and forced him to take something he doesn't like?" "You're making it sound worse than it really was. We have to ensure kids are getting a balanced meal, and the only way to monitor it is to require they eat our provided hot lunch." Anne didn't want to hear about how the school, once again, had to take individual choices away from students and parents. She wanted to grab Peter's hand and run, slamming the door back into Mrs. Krieg's face. But she fought herself. If she had learned anything since Peter enrolled in this school, it was that there was no point in fighting the system. "So, you got mad that they took your lunch and threw the one they gave you at the wall?" Anne questioned Peter. "No, Mommy, I tried to be good. I sat at the table with my plate, but it smelled so bad. I asked to leave, and the lady said I had to eat 3 things on my plate before I could. I couldn't even open my mouth to eat anything because the smell of tuna would get in there, and I wanted to throw up. Mommy, I just wanted to leave, and they won't let me. I was getting sick. I needed the tuna smell gone. I didn't mean to make a mess, but I needed the smell gone because they wouldn't let me leave. Peter's voice cracked as he relived the event. Anne swallowed hard, as she was amazed at the coincidence in occurrences. She couldn't judge him when she basically did the same thing at the grocery store. God's timing was perfect, as it made her experience the same thing, allowing her to see the world through his sensitive eyes. She understood how the smell of something could make you want to cry, scream, and get sick. Honey, we'll talk about this tonight with your father. Anne mustered up a tough mom voice to please Mrs. Krieg, but inside, she was dying. She knew the school saw this as a discipline issue, but Anne saw her sensitive little boy who no one understood. Let's go home, Anne said as she stood looking at Peter. Mrs. Krieg handed Anne a bundle of Peter's work to be completed at home. This was getting to be a routine too often as well. Early on, they noticed when Peter would get overwhelmed in the classroom, it would be best to remove him for the rest of the day. But now Anne's mind was starting to click a little differently. This school didn't have room for individuals. Something needs to change. Anne pulled her arm around Peter's shoulder, and they walked out together in silence. Anne drove the van and took a sharp left to indicate she wasn't going home. Where are you going? Peter asked. We need a treat from Steep and Brew. Anne smiled into the rearview mirror, hoping to get Peter to perk up. Sweet! I'm starving. Can I get a sandwich too? You sure can. I bet you're hungry since you decided to make wall art with your lunch, she teased. We'll get it to go, because I still have groceries in the car. That's what smells. Anne tried to smell groceries, but they were all bundled up in the back. She was puzzled for a minute, and then she saw her abandoned puke shoes. No, honey, you smell my morning. Anne slowly chuckled, but couldn't contain herself as her laughter broke into a full giggle. You're not the only one who couldn't handle a food aversion today. Anne dramatically retraced her morning for Peter's entertainment, and they both laughed until they had stomach aches. Gratitude was all she felt for her morning, now, as the shame and embarrassment was gone. Her eyes were opened to align with the sensitive eyes of her dear Peter. So, are you in trouble too? Peter asked. Anne thought about how nobody yelled at her, and how a nice lady helped her. Why was it different for kids? Again, the only thing Anne could come up with was the system. The school was not handling the situation well. They were wrong. Honey, neither one of us is in trouble. It wasn't right for you to throw the tuna. But I understand why you did it. It was a reflex to get it away so you wouldn't get sick. I know you know not to do that, so you're not in trouble. I think we may call those kids tonight and apologize, but having to endure the smell of tuna and embarrassment is probably all the pain you need. Anne couldn't discipline Peter on this one. It just didn't seem like he did anything wrong. Thanks, Mom, You're welcome. For what? For not listening to Mrs. Krieg. You listen to me. You're the only one who gets me. I wish you worked in the lunchroom. Anne's heart broke a little more. In one instance, hearing words as sweet as those would melt her heart, but it was also very sad. After today, she knew them to be the absolute truth. No one else understood him. Chapter 4. Hey, Anne, where are you? Thomas waved his hand in front of Anne's face. Blinking her eyes, Anne came out of her daydream about the past and focused on Thomas standing in front of her. Oh, I didn't see you. No kidding. You didn't see me. I was standing here offering you this tray of food, and you didn't even look. Thomas set the tray on the table next to Anne. Are you worried about the test? No, I'm not even thinking about the test. I was just thinking about the time I threw up all over the bathroom at the grocery store. It was the day I was supposed to meet Peter's principal. Thomas nodded. Yeah, that day was sort of the start of it, wasn't it? Start of what? When we started listening to Peter about how to parent him. Thomas sat down next to Anne and continued. Look where he has led us. Anne smiled and grabbed her juice bottle. She noticed the tray Thomas brought her was mauve. It was the same color as the last time she ate hospital food when Peter was in the hospital. In all the times I have eaten at this hospital, and it has been a lot, I don't ever remember there being a different color food tray. Mauves, so blah. The lab technician appeared from behind the lab door and escorted Anne back inside the lab for tests. Good luck. Thomas winked at her. I'm going outside to call my mom. I'll see you when you're done. Anne nodded and walked through the door. The smell of hand sanitizer hit her first. She sat in a cold chair with her arm resting on the armchair, ready for the lady to take her blood. Anne's stomach still hadn't settled. After the nurse filled 3 vials of blood, she was done. Anne reached down to grab her purse and then rose to her feet. She involuntarily stepped backwards. She grabbed the wall to steady herself. The lab technician instructed Anne to sit back down. You can wait here for a few minutes. Do you need me to grab you a juice? No, I actually have one in my purse. I just didn't have time to drink it yet. Anne pulled the juice from her purse, opened it, and took a swig. I should be okay, and I'm in sort of a hurry. All right, go ahead, but if you start to feel dizzy, please sit down, she said kindly. Anne nodded. Thank you. She recognized the Cover Your Cough poster on the door. The pictures of people sneezing and coughing made her want to lather hand sanitizer all over her hands and arms. Just to be safe, she pushed the door open with her backside to keep her hands clean. Thomas was sitting where she had left him. Are you off the phone already? No, I didn't have time. I started to leave, but then I was notified that Peter's in his room. I knew you wouldn't want to wait. Yeah, let's go. Do you have the room number? Adrenaline surged through Anne's body, making all signs of an ill stomach vanish as she rushed to the elevators down the hall. Thomas sprinted to catch up with her. We need to go to the 3rd floor, room 303. Except for Anne thumbing her nails on the elevator door, they traveled in silence to Peter's room. Anne slowed as she entered his room. She had braced herself to see all sorts of tubes and machines. She was surprised to see Peter looking normal. like he was sleeping, except for one IV in his left arm. Anne made her way to Peter's side. She picked up his right hand and squeezed. She paused only for a moment to thank God for her son's life. Anne spoke to Peter in a low, even tone. "Hi, honey. I'm so glad to see you. You look great, considering." Thomas glared at Anne. "Don't say considering. It sounds sad." "I don't know what to say." Anne chewed lip. "Can you hear us?" She tried again. Peter made no indication he heard them. Anne continued. "I love you. Your dad and I are both here, and we love you so much." Thomas interrupted. "Anne, you sound so sad. Let's talk about something happy." "What am I supposed to talk about then?" Thomas paused for a moment. "Peter, your mom and I were talking about the time she threw up all over herself at the grocery store." Anne picked up on her memory. "Yeah, it was the day I picked you up from school after the tuna incident." Still sedated with medication, Peter was unable to indicate he understood what they were saying. However, he did hear them, and he did remember that day. He also recalled how they had worked out a deal with the school for him not to have to be in the same room as Tuna ever again. It had been part of Peter's infamous kindergarten year, and Peter could do no right as far as the school was concerned. Thomas issued Mrs. Krieg a medical prescription for a tuna substitute to get around the school policy. His formal excuse read something like, Peter was at risk for malnourishment if he was not offered a substitute in place of tuna because of his medically diagnosed food aversion. Anne had arranged with the school for Peter to bring a bag lunch on tuna days, but he couldn't eat it in the lunchroom because that violated federal regulations of having competition with the hot lunch program. Peter had to take the bag lunch to the library, as that was the only room that staffed a teacher over lunch, because it was currently used as the detention room. A couple weeks after the tuna exemption was implemented, the fish was back on the menu, and Peter was once again prepared with a bag lunch. Traumatized from the last bag lunch incident, Peter was petrified of having someone throw it away, so he didn't let his lunch bag out of his sight. The only class he had before lunch was music, so instead of leaving his lunch bag in the classroom, he carried it with him. Once in the music room, he tucked it under his seat. That day, they sang Frosty the Snowman, and Peter was the loudest one. He loved the sound of his voice. Peter adored music class because this was the only place he was told to let his voice be heard. Everywhere else he went, people told him to be quiet. In addition to getting to make lots of sound, his music teacher, Mrs. Polly, was sweet, and she always had a smile on her face. The class was preparing for the annual Christmas concert in a couple of weeks. Peter couldn't stop thinking about being on stage and singing so loudly everyone in the school could hear him. The best part, Mrs. Polly had picked 2 students, one boy and one girl, for a solo, and he got the boy part. Mrs. Polly hand-selected Away in the Manger for Peter to sing, because it was perfect for a little soprano voice. I get to sing in a real microphone, and it's going to be awesome. The class went fast, and before he knew it, they were being asked to line up for lunch. Everyone was standing up except Peter, because Mrs. Polly asked him to wait for a couple seconds while she grabbed some learning materials for his solo. I'm hurrying to find it. I had it just a second ago. Oh, wait, here it is. Mrs. Polly called from the supply closet. She hustled over to where Peter was standing and presented a sheet and a CD to him. Just have your mom help you with the lyrics until you know them by heart. Next week, you and I can find some time, maybe during recess, to sit down at the piano and practice the song. Oh, and there's a recording on the CD you can listen to so you can hear it sung. Peter didn't say anything, but he thought, I'm going to practice every day. My mom's going to be so proud of me when she sees me on stage. The whole school will see that I'm someone special. You better hurry and catch up to the class or you'll miss lunch. Mrs. Polly interrupted Peter's daydream. Peter looked up and saw the last student had filed out of the class and the door was shutting behind them. I'm not going with them anyway. I have my own lunch. I hate tuna. He stuck out his tongue in a pretend gag. I have to take this to the detention room. He grabbed his bag lunch and started over to the exit door. You got detention? No, but I'm not allowed in the lunchroom with a bag lunch, and that's the only other room where a teacher's working during lunch. Mrs. Polly studied his sad face. You know, Peter, I have a bag lunch too. I was going to eat it now in my classroom. If you want to eat with me, we can work on your solo now. I can call down to your teacher and get it approved. Peter's face lit up, and without hesitation, he nodded a big yes. Mrs. Polly's the nicest person in this school. I'm so lucky I get to spend my lunch with her. Okay, wait here while I make my calls, and I need to grab my lunch too. It's in the fridge in the teacher's lounge across the hall. Can I treat you to a cold juice or something from the machine in there? Peter's heart was bursting. Aw, man, I bet the teacher's lounge has the best juice. But if I drank 2 juices, I might have an accident, so I better not. He shook his head and said, No thanks. Mrs. Polly left the room for a few seconds, and Peter, who could never sit still, looked down at the piano keys. His fingers were usually tight. Being left-handed, the fingers on that hand were more limber as they got used more. He stuck out his left index finger to push one key all the way down. He waited as he absorbed the sound. That sounds like the higher-pitched key Mrs. Polly just played. He wanted more. With his index finger, he pressed the next key and the next, listened to them one at a time. I think these keys here are pretty much the keys she used for Frosty the Snowman. He plucked out the tune, trying to make it sound the same. When he messed up, he started over until he found the right rhythm. Aha, I got it. That's it. Deep in thought, with his tongue hanging out the left side of his mouth in thinking cap mode, he finished the song. He even clapped for himself. That's awesome! I did it! He looked around to find his missing teacher, and he was startled to see she was standing beside him. Oh, hi! You scared me, he said, and then he giggled nervously. I was just listening to you play. Peter folded his bottom lip in fright, and then said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to play. I mean, I should have asked. I was sitting here and had that song in my head. Peter was accustomed to having everyone in his world upset with him, so he was always on auto-apology mode. You're not in trouble. I liked it. I didn't know you played piano. Who gives you lessons? Mrs. Polly bit into a baby carrot while she held the bag with the opposite hand and plopped down next to Peter on the bench. I don't play the piano. I just sat here. Mrs. Polly furrowed her eyebrows. Peter, I heard you play just now. It was perfect. Who taught you that? Does your mom or dad play? No, I never played. I just heard the song because you played it. I pushed the keys and they sounded like the right ones, Peter defended. Mrs. Polly smiled in a disbelieving way. You did a nice job. Let's work on your solo. I'll play it on the piano first, and then we can sing it together. Don't worry if you don't get it right away, as this is just practice. She played and sang. Peter loved the song and the piano, and Mrs. Polly had such a pretty voice. Peter quickly learned the correct pitch and words. They sang and played and ate their lunch in between verses. Peter had a blast. Oh, that's the first bell, Peter. You better get your stuff and head back to class, Mrs. Polly urged him at the sound of the buzzing. I'll go on the second bell, which is in 3 more minutes. Can I try the piano part before I go? Peter asked with his cheeks turning pink. Mrs. Polly turned her head to the side in surprise. Sure. She moved her body over to the side of the bench. Peter centered himself on the keys he needed and then plucked out the exact chords to Away in the Manger. When he was finished, he lifted his head and proclaimed, I watched you this time, so it was easier to find the keys. Mrs. Polly swallowed. She saw him watch her play, and now he played it almost as well as she did. That was beautiful, Peter. By now, she was on to his teasing. Can we have lunch next week, too? Peter asked. Sure. We can try to work on this solo again. I'll let you know Monday what day works for me. Cool, Peter said, excited as he grabbed his garbage and headed out the door. This was the best day.